Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming in. I hope you're all doing safe and well. But I hope you're all safe and well. So we're off to a good start, Simon. I hope you're all safe and well this Monday night. I was going to say Tuesday. It's Monday. This Monday evening. I'll get it right yet. Anyway, we are welcoming back our good friend, Top Hat Tours man himself, Mr Simon Entwistle. Tonight about a month ago, we covered the story of the Salmesbury Witches with Simon, and it was a really interesting, fantastic night. So we're back tonight to cover the paranormal side of Salmesbury Hall, the history of it, and the spirits that are still said to roam there. Simon does a lot with Salmesbury Hall, does ghost tours, etc. there. So if anybody knows anything about the place, it's the man sitting next to me. Well, he's not next to me, but, it's near enough next to me. So I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to let Simon take it from here and give you the rundown of Salmesbury Hall and who's still there or who may not be there. Oh, you're Simon.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott. And could I just say it's a real pleasure to be back with you once again. We've been conducting guided tours at Salmesbury Hall now since 1996. It's a building that I've really grown to know very, very well. And it has a reputation for being one of the most haunted buildings in the northwest of England. So let's turn the clock back in time. We'll turn the clock back in time to the year 1322. And living there was a family called the Southwards. The Southwards were really classed as local mafia. They owned all the land from Preston up to Kendal, and right down from Kendal down to Cheshire. Very wealthy people. They fought for the king at Agincourt, and they fought for the king at the Battle of Flodden Field way back in 1513. But the writing was on the wall for this family, because after 1536, King Henry VIII outlawed the Roman Catholic faith. And anyone preaching Catholicism will be classed as a traitor. The Southwards refused to accept any other religion apart from the Catholic faith. And as a result, Salmesbury Hall was a safe haven for Catholic priests. To this very, very day, if you make your way to the hall, you'll find what we call priest holes, designed by a gentleman called Nicholas Owen. And Nicholas Owen's work was ahead of its time. He was using springs, sprockets and slides before they'd even been invented. In fact, some of his work is so good, it hasn't been discovered. And you can pick up the national newspapers and hear our cleaning ladies from Land's End to John O'Groats who've accidentally touched something and a door's come from nowhere or a roof was lowered. He was a genius, an absolute genius. However, the Southwards were harbouring priests, and one bitterly cold night in 1606, a Catholic priest arrived on the shores of Lancashire, came inland, and was welcomed by the Southwards. They took him upstairs to the priest's room. He had a change of clothing and a nice warm meal, but he had no idea he had brought the army with him, and the army surrounded Salmesbury Hall. 5 soldiers broke the door in downstairs. All the Southwards were arrested. They had their hands tied behind their backs and made to lie in the grass lawns outside the hall, whilst the soldiers searched the building. They caught this young priest upstairs. The poor lad was executed by beheading in that very, very priest's room. And the Southwards made the long, long journey down to the south of England and the city of London, where they were thrown into the Tower. The only thing that saved their lives was the fact they'd fought so well for the king at Agincourt and Flodden Field. That was the only thing that saved their lives. However, the building now became the property of the Crown. The building was bought by a gentleman called Gale John Braddoll from the village of Whalley near Clitheroe. And when he purchased the building, he made his way upstairs to the priest's room, which was still heavily spattered with medieval blood. They tried to clean the floor, but to no avail. The blood just wouldn't disappear. So therefore, they had the priest's room bricked up. In 1898, many centuries later, a gentleman called Frederick Baines purchased Salmesbury Hall, and he took away the bricks and found that the floor was still heavily stained with blood. He said, "I do not believe in this superstitious rubbish of this room being haunted. I'm having those floorboards removed and some Victorian floorboards inserted to replace them. They too have become mysteriously haunted and indeed mysteriously coated in blood. I can guarantee to this very day, if you make you inside the priest's room and take a photograph of the floor, you will indeed see a red stain. In the time I've been there, we've had every conceivable television and radio company that find the paranormal fascinating. And just before COVID, we had a group from Israeli television, and one of the Israeli presenters spent the night in the priest's room. When I arrived to conduct a guided tour the following day, she said, "Simon, you've got to look at this footage." I made my way outside the building where they had a large vehicle full of equipment, transmitting equipment, and she showed me herself sleeping in the priest's room, and she wound it back, and you could see a chair actually turn in the room by itself when she was fast asleep. This was also going out live to Tel Aviv on Israeli television. But let's start with some more ghostly stories. We're going to leave the main hall and make our way into an area known simply as reception area. And in the reception area, you will find a beautiful fireplace with one of Nicholas Owen's excellent pre-cells integrated into it. The actual extension was built by Thomas Southworth, an ardent Catholic. He told his wife, "When I pass away, my dear, will you please count my last wishes? And my last wishes are to be laid in my coffin in front of the fireplace for 2 days, a typical Roman Catholic wake. In one hand, he had a bell. In the other hand, he had a glass of port. If he rang the bell, everyone would realise he was still alive. And of course, he'd drink the port as well. You've heard the expression, a dead ringer. That's exactly where it came from. But in the case of Thomas Southworth, the bell never rang and the port was never drunk. That year, we are told, was 1578. We're now going to go to 1972. And the hall has a huge connection with the American War of Independence. As a result, they do get a lot of Canadian and American tourists. One such family arrived from New Jersey in 1972, the Ericsson family, mum, dad, 3 daughters. They made their way inside the hall and started taking photographs. They were very, very impressed with this beautiful fireplace in the reception area. And Mr. Ericsson took some photographs from some rather unusual angles, went back to New Jersey and handed the film in. 3 days later, he went back to look at the film process and skipped to the photographs. His jaw dropped in amazement at the photograph he had taken from a rather acute angle on the fireplace. You could clearly see a coffin on a trestle, and it wasn't there when he took the photograph. You will find that photograph on this Salisbury Hall website. It's been looked at by experts, and no one seems to be able to come up with a logical explanation. Now, back in 1923, Salisbury Hall was in danger of being knocked down. Huge holes appeared in the ceiling. The long gallery was in danger of collapsing. And a flock of builders gathered like a flock of vultures to take away all the stone and all the timber. On the 11th hour, the Salisbury Hall Preservation Society were formed, and these consisted mainly of historians and entrepreneurs, and they produced enough money to save this beautiful building from falling down. They could not let any Tom, Dick and Harry work in Salisbury Hall. It had to be someone who was highly skilled in medieval buildings. One such person fit the bill beautifully, and wait for his name, Mr. Michael Palin. No relation to our Monty Python star whatsoever. Michael had worked on some amazing buildings in England. He'd worked on Smithhills Hall in Bolton. He'd worked in Bodelwyddan Castle, North Wales. He'd worked in Bramhall in Cheshire, Levens Hall in Cumbria, and he knew his stuff. He arrived on a beautiful June day with his 4 apprentices and gave each apprentice a different part of the hall to work on. He chose the reception area. He got a ladder, climbed up the ladder to look at the roof, to look at the bosses that were hanging really awkwardly. With a hammer and chisel, he chiseled away at an old and eroded stone and pushed the stone off. The stone fell down towards the floor, and there, to Palin's horror, was a little boy with curly black hair just standing at the bottom of the ladder. The stone came down, grazed his nose, and landed right in front of his feet. Michael came down that ladder at great speed to give this lad a piece of his mind. He could have been killed. He could have been badly injured. But the role was reversed. The little boy shouted, "You shouldn't be here. You've got no right to be here." "Well, I have got a right to be here. I've been paid to work in this building. You stand back, lad," shouted Michael. Michael climbed up the ladder, turned round, and this little lad had disappeared. He thought, that's strange. He must be a very quick runner. For the next 5 months, they worked their socks off, bringing in new timber, new tiles, new floorboards, and the hall was beginning to look a bit like its former self once again.
Mm-hmm.
They arrived as usual for another hard day's graft in a bitterly cold December day. As they started working, the blue sky behind them disappeared and was replaced by huge clouds full of snow. Heavy, heavy snow came down from the heavens. Michael looked out of the window and noticed that the snow was coming down so thick and so fast that all the roads leading from the hall were clogged with snow. He got his timepiece out and looked at the time and assembled the 4 apprentices. "Right, boys, there's no way we're going to get back to Darwin tonight. We'll have to spend the night here at the hall." The 4 apprentices were really upset. It was getting towards Christmas, but they looked out the window and the snow was getting thicker and thicker. In fact, creeping up the side of the window outside. They trudged out into the blizzard, into freezing, freezing conditions, and made their way into the nearby forest and came back with logs, twigs, and branches, and got a roaring fire going inside the reception area. Now, in 1923, there's no television, no radio, no mobile phones, no laptops. The only thing that take would be a good night's sleep, really. So the 4 boys got their bedrolls and rolled them out in front of the fire. They fell into a deep sleep. Michael was about to join them. Now, Michael was an ardent Christian. He rolled his bedroll out, sat on the bedroll, and had a few words with the good Lord upstairs. But halfway through his prayers, he became aware of a golden, glowing light. And this glowing light seemed to get stronger and stronger. And out of that golden, glowing light suddenly stepped a very, very beautiful young lady in Tudor dress. She very elegantly made her way past Michael, straight towards the fireplace, and put her hand on top of the mantelpiece of the fire. Michael heard her utter the words, "I pray my husband will survive this campaign." She then shimmered, left but with a crackle and a scent in the air. Michael's heart accelerated in his chest. His mouth went dry. He gingerly turned to look at the doorway for the second time and saw another golden glowing light emerging. And out of that golden glowing light suddenly stepped a 1642 Cavalier officer. Typical English Civil War. Bandoliers across the chest, goatee beard, a wart under his eye, feathers in his cap. He made his way to the mantelpiece. He too put his hand on top of the mantelpiece, and Michael heard him utter the words, "I will survive this war." He then shimmered and disappeared. By now, Michael, from his vantage point, is getting very, very traumatized. He's seen something very paranormal. He gingerly, nervously, for the 3rd time, stares at the door and sees another golden glowing shape, but a much smaller one. And out of that golden glowing light suddenly stepped the little boy that had nearly been hit by the stone from the roof in June of that year, the curly-haired boy. He ran straight past Michael, through the apprentices, and out of the wall next to him. As you can imagine, Michael did not sleep very well that night, but quite surprisingly, when the boys woke up, he didn't tell them. He told no one. He didn't even tell his family when he got back to his home in Darwin, near Blackburn. But some 23 years later, as a very, very elderly gentleman, he was making his way past the hall, as he had done on many occasions, just to admire his handiwork, when he saw parked outside the hall's entrance a military vehicle belonging to the Royal Air Force. He thought, RAF, what are they doing there? He walked across the lawns towards the main entrance door, and through the door panelling, he could see 2 Royal Air Force personnel standing by the fireplace, both in Royal Air Force uniform, one a female, one a male. He entered the room. The door clicked. They turned. Michael entered the room. He made eye contact with the young lady in the Royal Air Force uniform and just stood and stared at her. Quite naturally, she felt very embarrassed. Can I help you, please? She said. Her companion, the officer, then intervened. Can we help you, please? Michael recognized the girl in the RAF uniform to be the same beautiful young lady he'd seen walk out of that golden glowing light in 1923. He told her. She burst into tears. Mr. Palin, I don't disbelieve a word you've told me, but I'm from the city of Leicester. I've never been to Lancashire in my life before, but as we drove past in the staff car, I shouted, stop, stop. I know this place. I've been here before. And you, Mr. Palin, have just answered my anxieties. And that, I can assure you, is a very, very true story. But let's now make our way from that room, and we'll go to the chapel. And this next story is very much an affair of the heart. It's well documented, but a tragic story. And we'll turn the clock back now to 1589 and the story of Lady Dorothea Southworth. By all accounts, she was a very bonny young girl, beautiful blue eyes, long blonde hair. And on a gorgeous May morning of that year, she woke up in the long gallery. She made her way downstairs, across the manicured lawns, and into the forest. There she had the misfortune, and it really was misfortune, of meeting a young lad of the name of Gilbert de Horton. He was a very, very wealthy young man from the neighbouring little village of Turton, not too far from Salisbury Hall. His parents were exceptionally wealthy, and they owned Horton Towers. So landowner meets landowner, girl meets boy, boy meets girl, but a huge problem for Lady Dorothea Southworth as she made her way back to the hall. She told her father. He was livid. We're Catholics. They're Protestants. You will never, ever, ever see him again. He's not welcome under my roof. We are Catholics. They are Protestants. If you continue with this relationship, I'll have you sent to Marseille to live with the nuns. We're Catholics. The poor girl was quite stunned. She'd found someone she really liked. And if anything, her father's threats seemed to fuel their love. She would leave her bed in the early hours of the morning, tiptoe past her parents, and make her way into the forest to meet young de Horton. Her father warned her again, if you continue with this relationship, I will have you banished. You will live with the nuns in the south of France. We are Catholics. They are Protestants. He then told her 2 brothers, tonight, do what's necessary. On a beautiful moonlit night, Dorothy left her bed. She tiptoed past what she thought were her sleeping brothers, what she thought were her sleeping parents. She made her way across the manicured lawns of the hall, over the moat, and into the forest. There, on the fringe of the forest, was young de Horton, illuminated in moonlight. When she saw him, her heart fluttered. He politely bowed. He affectionately kissed her hand, reached into his pocket, and produced a huge ring. Dorothea Will you end this heartache and become my wife? A huge smile came across her face. She gratefully accepted the proposal of marriage, knowing full well that her father and mother would ostracize her.
Mm-hmm.
They hugged each other in the moonlight, and then they heard shouting and screaming from the forest. And out of the forest appeared Dorothea's two brothers, both armed with two very sharp knives. They maliciously, cruelly murdered the young lad right in front of her. Dorothy's heart was snapped in two. She was dragged back into the hall and straight into the chapel under house arrest. The following morning, she made the long, long journey to Marseille to live with a nun to the south of France. On arriving there, that poor girl never ate again, she never slept again, and she died literally of a broken heart. That's when the famous sightings of what we now call the White Lady of Salisbury have taken place. Over the centuries, there's been many, many, many sightings. So therefore, I'll just use two stories. And we'll turn the clock back now to 1878. And in nearby Blackburn, in nearby Preston, we had what's called Textile Riots. The army are called in to handle the alcohol-fueled textile riots in both towns.
Mm-hmm.
The regiment chosen was the 24th Regiment of Foot, the South Wales Borderers. Just the senior officers were billeted at Salmesbury Hall. Lieutenant Colonel John Pillene's South Wales Regiment had just toasted the regiment when he said, "Right, gentlemen, we shall retire for the night." He climbed to his bunk, fell into a deep sleep, but in the early hours of the morning he was woken by sobbing. "That's strange, not one of my men sounds like a female to me." He got dressed very quickly. He opened the curtains and looked into the grounds of Salisbury Hall, and there, in between the horse chestnuts and the yew tree, he could make out the shape of a female with a long white gown on that looked to be deeply, deeply depressed or deeply frustrated. He went down the stairs. He rushed across the lawns and shouted, "Ma'am! Ma'am! May I be of assistance to you, ma'am?" The figure slowly turned. Where there should have been a face was a hollow, dark cavity. The colonel screamed. He was no coward. He'd taken the life of many a Russian soldier in the Crimean Wars, but rushed back into the building, ran upstairs, and instantly reached for his British Army regulation hip flask and consumed the contents. The following morning, he had breakfasted the Harrisons, the owners of the hall, and they laughed. "Oh, Colonel, don't worry. You've seen Lady Dorothea. She's been with us since the latter part of the 16th century." The colonel had no idea he was going to meet her personally. His regiment, the 24th, was sent overseas some 5 weeks later to join Lord Chelmsford's ill-fated No. 3 column. They invaded Zululand on the 21st of January, 1879. Beneath a rocky outcrop called Isandlwana in Natal State, South Africa, King Katsuwe, the Zulu king, unleashed his Zulu impis and wiped out the entire 24th Regiment of Foot. The colonel formed a square with the remnants of his brigade and toasted the White Lady before he succumbed to the Zulu assegai. In 1926, a big question was answered at the hall. The road to the side of it was widened to take more heavier traffic. And as the engineers came down the road to widen it, they filled in the old moat, but they put in what's called a herringbone drainage system, which went right through the lawns of Salmesbury Hall. One of them went between the horse chestnut and the yew tree.
Mm-hmm.
Beneath the surface, they came across the adult foot of a human skeleton. Blackburn CID were brought in. They did a lot more work, removing more soil. And the sergeant in charge of the excavation said, "Well, it's definitely a murder, but I don't think we'll catch the culprit. This lad's been here for at least 4 centuries." More soil was removed from the grave, and they found one of the bony fingers, a beautiful, beautiful ring embedded with gems and other jewels. They looked inside the ring, and they found the beautiful engraving, the words Dorothea de Horton. It was none other than young de Horton, who'd been murdered by the two Southwark boys all those years ago, whose only crime in life was to fall in love with a young Catholic girl and to be a member of the Protestant religion. It seems such a tragic shame, but that would explain why the White Lady of Salisbury will make her way to the grave of the only boy that ever showed her any love, any warmth, and any affection. We're now going to make our way from that area, and we'll go upstairs to a place called the Long Gallery. Now, this next story is not so much a haunting story, but it's certainly an unusual one. Salisbury Hall has had many, many guests over the years. Rudyard Kipling, Charles Dickens. It's said that Dickens got the idea of the old curiosity shop from looking at the roof of the Long Gallery. But one of my favourite stories, not so much a paranormal story, but it's an intriguing story. They had a very, very important visitor way back in 1941. He was called Sir Winston Church. Now, not too far from Salisbury Hall is an aircraft factory, which this very day makes aircraft for the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. Churchill had a look at the factory way back in 1942 and was very, very impressed with one aircraft in particular called the Beaufighter. He then had a word with the two air commodores who had accompanied him that morning and said, "Gentlemen, have we got any place for lunch today?" "Yes, sir," said the air commodore. "There's a place called Salmesbury Hall. We've got the Long Gallery to ourselves, sir." Churchill arrived at the Long Gallery, enjoyed a fantastic three-course luncheon with the two air commodores, and was given a large cigar and probably a very large glass of brandy to follow. He then said to the two air commodores, "Gentlemen, France has been alone since the 10th of May 1940. I would like to do something to bolster French morale, to let them know that we're still here. Could you come with an idea?" The two air commodores came with a great idea, which was actually hatched under that very, very roof. It was called Operation Squabble. And the whole idea of Operation Squabble was to fly one of these brand new Bristol Beaufighters right down the Champs-Elysees and drop a tricolour over the Arc de Triomphe in broad daylight. Now, they needed volunteers. Who should volunteer but two young boys from number 236 Squadron, Coastal Command, Flight Lieutenant Kenneth Gatwood and Flight Sergeant Gilbert Fern, both 20 years of age. They weren't told about the operation. They were just told to drop a flag at 400 miles an hour over a building the height of the Arc de Triomphe. And they chose an old wreck in the English Channel, that the masts were the same height above the water level as the Arc de Triomphe. But each time they dropped the flag, it blew away. And Gilbert had a great idea. Let's put 4 fishing weights into the corner, roll the flag into a scroll, and drop it down the flare chute. They kept hitting the mast. They went back to the ops room at Portsmouth, and they said, "Sir, we're ready." Well, they met Churchill, they met the two air commodores, and they were shown these huge maps of Paris. "Right, gentlemen, this is Operation Squabble. We want you to fly down the Champs-Elysees in broad daylight and drop a tricolour over the Arc de Triomphe, the national flag of France. But we worked out from RF intelligence, if you get there for exactly 11:30, you'll meet the German band marching down the Champs-Elysees. You can open fire on them, and then open fire on the Gestapo building and drop a second tricolour over the roof. You've got 1 minute, 30 seconds before the Luftwaffe will be on you like a ton of bricks." Our two brave boys took off on the 12th of June, 1942, with their brand new Bristol Beaufighter. They had 2 trickles on board. They had lots of ammunition, but they didn't have a lot of fuel, but that was designed to keep the aircraft as light as possible. They took off from Portsmouth, hugging the English Channel, came out at Calais at 400 miles an hour, and kept the aircraft as low as possible. In the distance, Ken could see the Eiffel Tower. He brought the Beaufighter around the back of the Eiffel Tower and dropped it like a stone. Gilbert climbed to the front of the aircraft with his stopwatch. He counted the seconds, waited for the Arc de Triomphe to loom up beneath them, and dropped the tricolor down the flare chute. It opened beautifully and caught the right-hand side of the Arc de Triomphe. The Parisians below are jumping for joy at their national flag hanging off the side of their national monument. But German troops and German officers are rushing out of the cabins and bars to shake their fist at the Royal Air Force crew. They continued down the Champs-Élysées. Ken looked at the reflector gun sight and saw the crisscross wires in the centre of a group of field grey troops. He opened fire with devastating effect, killing 38 German soldiers in 2.1 seconds. The Gestapo building loomed up. He opened fire on that, killing 14 people inside the building, whilst Gilbert dropped the second tricolor right over the roof. They put the engine into overdrive and raced back to Portsmouth at 400 miles an hour. The only damage to the Beaufighter was a French crow that had been sucked into the left air intake, causing the engine to overheat slightly. They landed back to Portsmouth to a rapturous applause from the ground crews, and the first thing they did was take the camera off the aircraft to look at the pictures. You can see those pictures on the internet under Operation Squabble, and one of them, they're flying so low you can see straight into a Parisian theatre and see what they were actually watching that night. One man wasn't happy though, Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French. Why was I not informed? How dare you do this without my permission? I want his men arrested immediately. Well, they weren't arrested. Ken received the Distinguished Flying Cross, Gilbert Distinguished Flying Medal, and both men came back to Salmesbury Hall in 1946 with Sir Winston Churchill, the two Air Commodores, National Press, and two members of the French Embassy. They were both awarded the Croix de Guerre at Salmesbury Hall, and that picture proudly hangs in the main entrance. So not so much a ghostly tale, but certainly a tale that definitely does bring Salmesbury Hall to the fore once again. But we'll now continue with our spooky side, and I do apologise for, shall I say, deviating a little bit there.
Oh, I saw that. That was I've never heard that story, Simon, at all. And you know, just when that's the thing I love about you, when you're telling stories as if we're there, you know, because you do it that well. It draws you in, and everything kind of round about you. You know, you switch off to everything round about you, and so you've got, you know, I'm sitting here listening to you, and you get the image of the two guys in the plane dropping the flags and the Germans, you know, not the whole thing. Do you know what I mean? So do not apologise, buddy, because
thank you, Scott.
Story. I mean, anyway, carry on.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott. We're now going to make our way into the chapel at Salmesbury Hall, and first of all, there are 4 different tours there. I do the spooky tour, but you've got some historical tours, you've got Tudor tours, but they do bring in a fantastic guy at night time called Gary Johnson. Gary is a spirit medium. His other job, would you believe, is the manager to Russell Watson, the tenor. Gary can see things that you and I can't. He has a sixth sense. He is a medium. You do come across these people who can see things that you and I can't. This next story is very, very much from him, really. But so we will turn the clock back now to 1773 and a wedding that took place there between a British Army officer called the Lieutenant John Creasap to Gail John Braddell's great-great-granddaughter. It was a lovely wedding by all accounts, and the wedding party made their way to the main hall, enjoyed a meal. Now, Creasap was a serving British Army officer. He was sent overseas to the garrison at Philadelphia. From the garrison to Philadelphia, he was sent up north to British Army headquarters, Boston. His wife loved New England, and she said, "John, why don't you surrender your commission and become a civilian? This is the land of opportunity." "I will. I'm sick of the army," said her husband. They started their own business, were doing very, very well. Their next door neighbours were doing very well. But one person recognised this more than anyone else was good old King George back in England, And he thought, these people need taxing and taxing and taxing again. John said to his wife, I'm working my socks off, and all I'm doing is paying tax back to the king in England. He then met another Northern Englishman like himself called George Washington. George Washington came from the village of Yelland, Redmayne, which is situated near Carnforth in North Lancashire. And Washington said, John, I believe you served in the British Army. I would like to know all about British Army infantry tactics, because I would like to form a rebel army and throw the British out of North America. Will you join me? I will join you. I'm sick and tired of this taxation. It's got beyond a joke. So John Creasap became what's called a Pathfinder General. He was at Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, and the final surrender at Yorktown, where the Americans and the French combined to defeat the British at Yorktown. And America then became an independent country. Washington, of course, became the very, very first president, and he asked to see John Creasap. Ah, John, you've done an excellent job for me. I would like to offer you a position as a general in the new United States Armed Forces. Will you join me? I will join you, sir, but I'd like to work for you, sir. Now then, John, my next job for you is to encourage the natives to leave New Hampshire, New Jersey, New England. I think it's fair to say that John Creasap had the blood of many an innocent squaw, many an innocent brave on his hands. But all good things come to an end when he was captured by the Huron, North American, Canadian Indians. And just like John Wayne in a famous Western movie, he's tied to the totem pole, all his men are dispatched, and he's ordered to be given the death of 1,000 cuts. Now, John Creasap was a Yorkshireman. And for those of you watching, you'll know that Yorkshire folk are very, very stubborn. In fact, Sir Ranulph Fiennes will take note from Yorkshire on any of his tours because they like to whinge and complain. Creasap was no different. He showed no emotion whatsoever. He wasn't even bothered about dying. And this worried the Indians. They'd never seen such incredible bravery. They became scared of him. They released his bonds. He rushed back into the forest, got back to Washington's headquarters, and said, Sir, I've had enough of this, sir. I'd like to return to my native Craven in West Yorkshire, sir. Washington was horrified. John, my country is indebted to you. You will always be an American citizen. He got back to his native Craven, which is the West Riding of Yorkshire, buried at the city of Leeds. And every single 4th of July, a member of the American embassy will make his or her way up to the West Riding of Yorkshire to make sure the grave's been polished and some fresh flowers placed on top of the grave. Now, on the overnight stopovers, I mentioned Gary Johnson. Gary can see things that you and I can't. He's told me through his spirit medium workshops that he's come across the ghost of Creasap. Who else could it be but a red-coated British Army officer? You could say the all Yorkshire and all American hero. But the hall at night time can be a very, very spooky place. And Gary definitely brings it all to life. There's no two ways about it. But let's continue with our ghostly tales. I think it's fair to say that my favourite story has to be that of William Harrison. And we turn the clock back now to the 1860s, when Joseph and Nancy Harrison, again from the city of Leeds, West Yorkshire, they purchased Salmesbury Hall for 15 very, very happy years. It was indeed a school for young ladies. You can imagine the sound of children playing, the sound of children being educated. Must have been very, very pleasant. But when Nancy died, her husband, they say, died of a broken heart, and they left their entire wealth to their 21-year-old son, William. Now, William, he could drink for England. The alcohol flowed on a regular basis there. He had parties every single night. When Rudyard Kipling, when Charles Dickens and other celebrities arrived, they would all come to the hall to give private renditions to the family. He spent money like it was water. He became insolvent. The butler came upstairs, Mr. John Fresham, with a beautiful silver tray and a letter. The Morning Post, sir. Harrison opened a letter, a crisp letter, a beautiful white crisp letter from the city of Edinburgh, informing him that the Scottish Bank had just collapsed and he had lost an absolute fortune. Now, he was 21 years of age. He reached into his bureau and brought out a 45 service Colt revolver. He loaded the chamber, placed the barrel to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The bullet went through his cranium, through his brain, and became embedded in the top of the mantelpiece. He, of course, fell to the floor as dead as a doornail. But the bullet is still in the mantelpiece to this very, very day. On the overnight stopovers, Gary Johnson has come across his ghost on a few occasions. But you will find at the hall a lovely lady called Sharon. And Sharon is a very brave woman. You imagine in December, January, February, it's dark by 4:30. When all the staff have gone home, Sharon's job is to lock that building. She's armed with a torch. She'll go from room to room, turn the light off, and put the burglar alarm on, then go to the next room. When she has walked down the long gallery, past the mantelpiece, it hasn't happened every time. It's happened about 18 times over the last 10 years. She's stopped. The hair on the back of the head has rose, and she's heard the sounds of footsteps. Then her hair gets tugged. She turns around, there's no one there at all. It's only happened to Sharon and two of the girls that work in the restaurant. They all share blonde hair. Sharon told me that when I started my tours there in the hall, she said, it's very, very likely, Simon, if you have any blonde-haired ladies that get their hair tugged. I said, Sharon, I am not going to buy that one. However, I've seen it happen on a good 7 occasions, and the one thing I always do is look behind them. When you hear the scream, I look behind them. And I find it quite amazing when there's no one there at all. On one of those overnight stopovers, I came in for a Sunday tour, and Gary was there waiting for me. He said, Simon, you've got to look at this photograph. He showed me a photograph and mentioned that he had a coach party from London for an overnight stopover. And on that coach party was a mum and 3 daughters. The 3 daughters made their way to the long gallery. The mother took a photograph, and out of the 3rd daughter was a 4th leg, a bit like Jake the Peg, if you will. And I said, when Gary showed me, I said, oh no, Gary, it's a beam from upstairs that looks like it's another leg. No, he said, look closer. I looked at the end of the foot of that leg, and you could clearly see a riding boot with crisscross laces. He got a book from the library of our friend Mr. Harrison, wearing exactly the same boot, the same crisscross laces. It seems that digital cameras can pick up things that you and I can't. Most amazing situation, really. But the long gallery is quite a fabulous place to be, really. But let's now make our way downstairs, and we'll make our way towards the kitchen areas, and there we'll find yet another ghostly character. The hall, of course, over the years has had many, many famous guests. And way back in 1874, they had a ball there. And quite a few people were invited to the ball. The family at the time were the Harrisons, and they employed a very, very beautiful young lady called Lucette. And she was a French governess. Her job was to educate the children and teach them French, of course, which at that period of time was very, very important to speak French and English. At the ball, they had an orchestra playing in the corner of the main hall. Everyone was given a nice glass of claret as they entered the building. And in came Christmas that year, a handsome British Army officer called Captain Starkey. He was given a glass of claret. He made his way into the main hall and stared into the eyes of Lucette. It was love at first sight. Within 3 weeks, he had proposed to her, and they got married in the hall. And just after the marriage, our good American cousins gained their independence and sent every available British soldier, of course, to the colony. Just after leaving, the captain was amazed to find that his wife had become pregnant. Of course, in those days, there's no telephones. You had to rely entirely on letters. Word filtered back to the hall that Lucette's husband, the red-coated officer, had been killed at Lexington. Of course, there was no way to confirm this or deny this, but word filtered back. It was just before Christmas of that year. Poor Lucette, heavily pregnant, was overcome with terrible, terrible depression at losing her husband, and she made her way to the nearby River Ribble, and she jumped into the cold, icy water, heavily pregnant with child. What makes the whole story so terribly, terribly sad is her husband had not been killed. He'd been captured and actually released by the Americans and came back 3 days later to find that his wife had taken her life with child. Overcome with grief, he too made his way to the cold, icy waters and jumped in to join them. They say their ghosts can only be seen around the Christmas period, and they can be seen walking down the long gallery and down the stairways down to the main hall, arm in arm. It seems that in the next life, they've been reunited. So I must say Salmesbury Hall is well worth a visit. Are we okay then, Scott?
Oh, that's some location. As I say, the way you tell the story, Simon, as if you're actually there. I mean, where do you start with a place like that? You know, I mean, I know up and down the country there's many haunted houses, haunted castles, etc.
Yes.
But Salmesbury Hall seems to have a spirit in every part.
Yes, we're looking at a building over 800 years old, Scott, and 4 different families have lived there. But the amount of tragedies that are taking place there, I mean, Dorothea losing her life, the young priest upstairs being beheaded, and also we got this poor chap, Harrison, who took his own life upstairs as well. So we're looking at some very, very unhappy and unpleasant events that have taken place there, but they're all extremely well documented. And the last time I talked to you, of course, we had the Salisbury Hall witches who were tried at exactly the same time as the Pendle witches. So there's a huge connection with witchcraft in the hall as well, really. But it is a building that I never, ever get tired of visiting and thoroughly enjoyed as well. I also cover Townley Hall, which is not too far away, and also Gawthorpe Hall, which is not too far away, and this lovely place called Bruzen, which is a gorgeous hall. And it's like I say, Scott, every hall has different stories and every room has different stories. And I like to take the stories on board and then relay them to an audience, really. On the 27th of this month, I've been very, very kindly invited to the Municipal Theatre at Combe, which is a North Lancashire town, for an evening of ghost stories, but from the stage. And it'll be really nice to actually have a roof over my head, walk the boards, but to an audience as well. And I've got a whole array of stories which I'll use from across the country, Scott.
Because I mean, you've been doing the tours, a long time, and I mean, we've had you on the show several times, and every time you just amaze us with the stories and the amount of knowledge that you've got, stored up. You're like a walking computer, basically. When it comes to the history, the dates and names, the whole lot. So, I mean, Salisbury Hall, I've heard the story of the floorboards, the priest.
Yes.
Where it was executed. I found that quite fascinating because I knew that that guy had replaced them, you know, with the Victorian ones, and the stain still appears to this day, basically, as you see if you take photographs. The Lady Dorothea, you know, I'd heard that one as well, which I found fascinating, because I think if I'm right, she used to go between the 2 points, you know, and obviously our lover's grave was right beside her, and I've never heard this, you know, the Winston Churchill one.
Yes.
That was fascinating. And the last one there, about the lady committed suicide in the river.
Yeah.
I've heard briefly about the guy called Harrison who'd shot himself, and I'd heard about the photograph that was taken with the leg, the boot. So, I mean, you've done many tours there. Have you ever experienced anything? You know, you were saying about ladies with blonde hair, hair. Have you ever experienced anything yourself that's been kind of knocked you for six?
The only thing that I've found, I mean, I'm not a medium, Scott. I collect ghost stories. I'm not a ghost hunter. I do get quite a few paranormal groups that will ask me to go on tours with them to talk about things, etc. But I believe that only certain people can see things. I believe that only certain people are mediums. They're quite rare people. They can see things that you and I can't. But it's funny. In February this year, I was invited to go to the hall to meet 3 lads from Birmingham called TGF. And these lads, they've got their own YouTube channel, and very good sense of humour. And they find the paranormal quite fascinating, really. I did a guided tour with those lads, and we went upstairs to the long gallery, the area we've just been talking about. And the door upstairs kept opening and slamming by itself. And it looked like it had been rigged. But I can assure you, it really hadn't been rigged, because we were all there together. And one guy was filming, and the other 2 lads were talking to me at the time, and I was telling these stories. You can find that on YouTube under TGF Salisbury Hall, and it comes to the most haunted house in England. But the door, it kept opening and closing only when I mentioned the Pendle Witch story, and it is quite fascinating. There was an atmosphere in that room that night. And it wasn't fixed. It really wasn't fixed. So do go to YouTube after this, folks. And
I don't usually write anything. You're special, Simon, because I don't usually write anything. I've always got a pen, but I never ever write anything down. I think it's a comfort thing. But I'm going to write that. See, I've got the book there. I'm going to write that down just now. TGF.
That's right. TGF Salisbury Hall.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's maybe, I mean, we've done nearly 260, 270 shows, and I think this is maybe about the 3rd time I've actually wrote something down.
Right.
So there you go. I forgot what I was going to say there. So, I mean, all these events have took place in the hall. The one with the little boy and the cavalier and the lady, to me, I mean, I'm no expert in the paranormal, you know, but it sounds to me like the gentleman and the lady are more a residual haunting. You know, with the 2 of them go to the fireplace.
Yes.
But the little boy, I would say, is an intelligent haunting, because obviously he faced up to that guy, you know, when he dropped the stone.
Yes, yeah.
You know, I would say the lady and the man are they're more likely to be seen than the little boy is, if it's a residual haunting. But I mean, it dates back to Henry VIII's time, you know, and everything that's happened there. There must be some, you know, I mean, we were out on Friday in Edinburgh at Greyfriars.
Oh, beautiful, yes.
Yeah, many times. And I was talking to one of the people that we had with us, and I says, the thing about Greyfriars is it sits in one of the main routes in and out of Edinburgh. But as soon as you step in that gate, you feel like you're back in the 1600s, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Time just kind of stops, you know. And I would imagine Salmesbury Hall to be somewhat the same. You know, you come off a busy road, you go through the gates on the estate, and as if you're just stepping back in time. You know, the modern world's forgotten about it. And then when you enter the building, hopefully we'll get there one day. They're probably looking at next year, but I'd imagine as soon as you step into the building, as if you're back in the, you know, like the 16th century. And I can only imagine the feeling that you get when you're standing in it. Do you get that kind of, I know you've been there many times, but do you still get the same feeling every time you go in?
Yeah, I do really, Scott. I consider myself very, very fortunate to do regular tours there, actually. I never, ever get tired because you always get quite large crowds there, really, quite a large group. And it's really funny. I do Sunday tours there on a regular basis, and you get families there. And I think the families actually enjoy the storytelling. And because it's quite a large hall, there's plenty of room there, really. But I get groups sometimes of 60, 70 people. And there's even young children there, and it's nice to provide an entertaining story for them all, really, but also to showcase the hall as well, of course.
I would imagine you've been in some buildings and you walk in and you think it feels quite heavy in here. You know, it's quite oppressive. You know, I would imagine Salmesbury Hall. And I could be wrong. You know, when you walk in, it's more like a kind of homely atmosphere.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, with the history, there's a lot of, you know, bloodshed and what have you happened in the place. But I would imagine when you walk in, it's more a welcoming atmosphere.
Yeah, I've never had any bad vibes there. I will be honest with you, Scott. Never had any bad vibes. The only time I actually did feel a wee bit scared would be it wasn't a paranormal tour. It was actually the Somme battlefield, a place called the Sunken Ridge, and that is a very, very haunting place to visit. Really, viewers can go into YouTube and just type in Lancashire Fusiliers at Hawthorne Ridge, and way back in 1st of July 1916, Geoffrey Malins was an early film pioneer, and he had a bodyguard of Fusiliers to take him to the sunken lane in the early hours of the morning and protect him, because his job was to film this huge underground explosion in the German trenches. And he poked the top of the camera from the top of the sunken lane and filmed this huge explosion. He had about 15 seconds of film left with him. So he turned up the Fusiliers and filmed them. And it's crystal clear, absolutely crystal clear. Many, many, many years later, the film was looked at. And Scotland Yard have a young lady who can lip read. And she watched the actual film. And she got accents and swear words, etc., from these lads who were just sitting in the sunken lane.
Mm-hmm.
But I've walked down the lane a few times. I do find military history quite fascinating. And I walked down there by myself and I heard the words, Wie geht's meine Herren? Bist du glücklich? Which means, are you okay, my friend? Are you happy? It was German, but there was no one there. There was absolutely no one there. It was a Tuesday morning. It was quite a pleasant May morning, but it was definitely a German voice. And the sunken lane, it's just that, a sunken lane with hedges on either side and a dip in the middle. But it was exactly the same place where Malins would have filmed those Fusiliers. That was the only time I've ever really experienced something which I would say was probably very paranormal, Scott.
Mm-hmm. You see, that's the thing. You say, you know, all the spirits that are reported there, you've been there countless times, you know, and you've never actually experienced this. It was made me think probably more kind of residual. The gentleman Harrison, I get the feeling that, again, I'm no expert, that he tends to wander about and just keeps an eye, just likes to watch people. You know, likes to be involved from the background, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You know,
it's the long gallery upstairs. That is quite a spooky place to be, really. They say that the priest woman this poor lad was executed is also very, very paranormal. But the Long Gallery does have a bit of an atmosphere, but I can't really pick it up because I'm not a psychic, not a medium. But the mediums that have been there. Some time ago, we had Danny, who, of course, you know very well, Scott, with his paranormal group, and they picked up on something there at the hall. I think Danny is one of these rather talented lads that can pick things up. Yeah.
I'd actually do, you know, I'd love to go to look at the history of the paranormal side also, but it might sound stupid, it might sound daft, you know, so apologies for that. I'd love to go and try and find these priest holes, because I know, I mean, we're big fans of the Tudor period, you know, and as you say, Catholicism was taboo, you know, big, you know, Henry was no chance. And so I know a lot of buildings up and down the country had these priest holes, and I'd love to go round Salmesbury Hall and just search for them. See back at the bottom, as you say, that gentleman was very talented in what he did, you know, and I would love to actually go around and just have a look to see if we could spot any.
Yeah,
you know.
Certainly in this part of the world, nearby Townley Hall in Burnley, there's one of Owen's works. It's almost like an optical illusion type priest hole. I mean, this guy was ahead of his time, really. I do know that the Protestant authorities were after him, and he was chased all over Great Britain and finally captured at a place called Hinley Hall in Somerset in 1606. He was sent to the Tower, but he was told there and then if he just renounced his faith and became an Anglican, he could go home. But he wouldn't. He became a Catholic martyr, and the poor lad was executed in the Tower of London, 1606. And if you've not been to the Tower of London, you've got to go. It is a fascinating place. You'll go to an area called the Bloody Tower, if you excuse the pun, and there you'll find, scratched into the alabaster plaster, beautiful handwriting of Anne Boleyn, beautiful handwriting of Sir Walter Raleigh, and beneath Sir Walter Raleigh, Lady Jane Penn, and then you've got Nicholas Owen. This day I shall be with my father. He was an ardent Catholic to the very, very end, and died a brutal, painful death, being hung, drawn and quartered. Definitely a Catholic martyr.
Well, that was, you know, I've been to the Tower 3 times. I've been to the Tower. And as you say, Simon, it's a fascinating building with a lot of bloody history. You know, I think it's back to 1066 or something. I think it was William the Conqueror that originally built it. Was a height sort of, well, I'm no bother Facebook user. I think it was William the Conqueror that originally built it.
Yes.
Way back. And as you say, the scribbling in the walls, you know, I've read them, and you think this was written by people who were imprisoned here, you know, 500-600 years ago, whatever.
Oh yes, yeah.
Still here. It's a kind of Tudor era graffiti.
It's beautiful handwriting. I mean, Anne Boleyn's handwriting is absolutely gorgeous to look at, isn't it? Really is.
As I mean, when you walk about the grounds, you know, and you think it's just kind of overwhelming. Obviously, as I say, we're big Tudor fans, but it's just overwhelming thinking, you know, the amount of people. You see Traitor's Gate as well. It's a lot different now to what it was back, you know, in Henry's time. But the amount of people that must have came through that, absolutely terrified.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Because you knew once you went into the Tower, the chances of you coming back out were slim to zero. You either ended up at Tyburn or Tower Hill. You know, that was, you know, or Smithfield maybe. But when you start to look at Traitor's Gate, and you think, you try and put yourself in their shoes, kind of thing, you know, coming off the boat and just walking in thinking that's I'm finished, you know, I'm not going anywhere. One thing about the Tower that got me, it's a beautiful place. I've been there and I spent hours in it. As you know, there's a big, huge disc which says it marks the execution spot. Now, I've been told by quite a few people that it's actually in the wrong place. The actual spot the scaffold was on the green that's in front of the, I think it's the constable's house, they call it, on that big square bit of grass. That's where Anne Boleyn was actually executed. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I don't know if you could shed any light on it. Just when you mentioned the tower, I thought, I'm going to ask Simon, see if he any idea if that is.
Well, we're told the execution place was the Green, wasn't it? So we're told, but it would have been very near there, I'm sure, Scott. But like you, I'm not exactly an expert on that itself, really.
But it is indeed, as Simon said, if you've never been to Tower of London, if you're in that area, definitely go, because it's an absolutely amazing place. Even though we started talking about Salmesbury Hall, we're not talking about we may a different distance-wise, but it's places that we all love, and this is just going back to what you were saying about the building. These people being ahead of their time. If you take in places like Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, I've been there as well, and you just stand. I mean, yourself, Hampton Court is massive. I didn't realise just how big it was until I actually stood in front of it. And you think about the building. I mean, this is back, that belonged to Cardinal Wolsey originally. So it's right to the early 1500s, maybe it was built. And it's just a masterpiece, basically.
Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
As is Salisbury Hall, and what have you. But I think we'll wind up there. We're only we're just slightly over the hour. But I would like to bring you back, Simon, because I'm not finished with Salisbury Hall, because yourself, there's a lot to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I'll just hold on to you for a wee second or two. So what's up next for you, Simon? You've got your talk on the 27th.
As you can imagine, Halloween's a very, very busy time, Scott. But I'm going to the Colne Municipal Theatre on the 27th of October, and there are a few more tickets available if you'd like to go, folks. And it's a night of ghost stories from across Great Britain, but in the stage itself. So there's a meal as well provided with the actual ticket. So it's going to be quite a good evening, really. Halloween, I'm in Clitheroe at 7:30 on Halloween from Clitheroe Castle Gates, and we'll be doing the Clitheroe Ghost Walk for that, really.
Okay, so it's definitely Top Hat Tours. Give it a look up, folks. It's Mr. who's over there. He pointed the wrong way there. It's Mr. Entwistle there. There's many historians throughout this country, and a lot of them are great. But Simon is good at what he does, especially we had them on covering the Pendle witches and what have you. Absolutely fascinating guy. Sorry I missed the start. We'll try to take care and see you soon. Bye, PIH. Thanks, Kathy Doll, for coming in. We'll see you soon. He's guy's a genius. What can I say? But I'll hold on just for a wee second or two after we come off, Simon, if that's all right. So, big major thanks to Simon for coming in. I think this is the least talking I've ever done on a show since we started. But I've totally loved it. I'm sure you'll agree. Every single story was absolutely fantastic. But we're going to call it a night there. We're back on Wednesday night with a horror makeup artist, podcaster, and spooky fan, Heidi Wagner. But again, a million thanks to Simon.
My pleasure.
Again, trust me. And thanks to everybody who came in and with your comments and what have you. And take care and enjoy the rest of your evening. So we'll say bye-bye for now, folks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.